On the outskirts of Ridgeton, where the desert heat shimmered like broken glass and every night felt 1 degree too quiet, 18-year-old Mariah Keene discovered something she was never meant to see, a massive circular imprint in the sand behind her house. Still warm as if something enormous had landed there minutes before she arrived. In the center of the imprint lay a single metal sphere, no bigger than her fist, humming with a heartbeat-like rhythm that matched hers perfectly, and when she touched it, the sky above her flickered like a dying light bulb, rearranging the stars into a pattern that spelled out her missing brother's initials. Right before a distorted voice rose from the sphere and whispered, "Mariah, they know you're looking for me." Mariah staggered back from the metal sphere, her pulse racing as the whisper dissolved into static, and before she could catch her breath, the entire imprint began to vibrate, soft at first, then strong enough to send tiny avalanches of sand rolling down the dunes. The sphere lifted off the ground on its own, hovering at her eye level, rotating slowly as thin blue lines of light carved themselves across its surface like veins waking from a long sleep. The air around her shifted from desert heat to a cold, electric tension that raised goosebumps along her arms, and then the sphere projected a hologram, grainy, glitching, but unmistakably her brother, younger and terrified, standing in a dark metallic hallway she had never seen before. He looked straight at her, eyes wide with warning, and said in a shaking voice, "Raya, if you found this, it means they've already found you. Whatever happens, don't trust anyone wearing silver." The hologram flickered violently, and before Mariah could speak, the image of her brother jerked to the side as if something had grabbed him. A metallic screech echoed through the projection, followed by a blinding flash that made the hovering sphere drop into the sand like a dead weight. Mariah lunged forward, but the sphere seared the ground with a burst of blue light, burning a perfect ring around itself as if marking a boundary she wasn't supposed to cross. Her brother's last distorted words crackled from deep inside it, "They're coming. Raya, run." And almost on cue, headlights appeared over the desert ridge behind her, silent and swift, belonging to a matte black vehicle with no license plates and windows so dark they swallowed the moonlight. Mariah's throat tightened as the vehicle rolled to a stop without kicking up a single grain of sand, and a tall figure stepped out slowly, wearing a reflective silver visor. The silver-visored figure stood completely still, as if analyzing her from the darkness, and the desert seemed to hold its breath. Mariah backed away slowly, her heel brushing against the cooling metal sphere, which pulsed once, soft but desperate, like it was warning her. The figure raised a small rectangular device that emitted a thin vertical beam of white light, scanning the air in front of it until the beam landed directly on Mariah's chest. A muted beep echoed across the dunes, followed by the figure's distorted voice saying, "Subject confirmed. Level 3 retrieval authorized." Mariah's stomach dropped. Retrieval. For her. Before she could run, the sand beneath her rippled outward in a perfect circle, like something massive and unseen had just awakened under the surface. The sphere at her feet vibrated harder, projecting a quick burst of symbols in the air. Symbols she didn't recognize, but instinctively felt, and the moment the figure took a step toward her, the sphere released a shockwave that shoved Mariah backward as if trying to protect her, its light flaring with the same blue her brother's eyes had when he laughed under the Arizona sun. The shockwave hit so hard it threw Mariah into the sand, knocking the breath from her lungs, and for a second the entire desert went silent. No wind, no hum, no sound except her pounding heartbeat. The silver-visored figure staggered, but didn't fall, stabilizing itself with an unnatural, mechanical rigidity, then turned its head toward the sphere as if recognizing it. Mariah watched, frozen, as the figure spoke into its wrist in a low metallic tone. "Artifact Theta 9 is active. Subject synchronized. Initiate containment before it fully bonds." Fully bonds? With her? The sphere lifted off the ground again, but this time it hovered protectively in front of Mariah, spinning faster, its blue veins brightening until they looked like cracks in a star. The figure lunged forward, reaching for her with a gloved hand. But the sphere unleashed a second burst of energy, narrower, sharper, almost like a cutting beam. that sliced through the sand and forced the figure to jump back. Then, without warning, the sphere projected a new hologram, this one not of her brother, but of a map she had never seen, full of shifting lines, moving coordinates, and a blinking red point right where she stood. Next to the blinking point appeared a single word that made her blood run cold. Mariah didn't wait to think. Her body moved before her mind did, scrambling up the dune as the sphere darted beside her like a protective guardian. Behind her, the silver-visored figure shouted an order she didn't understand. And the black vehicle's roof split open, releasing a swarm of tiny drone-like devices that flew out with a high-pitched whir, spreading across the night sky like metallic insects. Each drone emitted a thin scanning beam that swept the dunes in sharp zigzags, searching, calculating, triangulating. The sphere flashed red for the first time, panic red, projecting a rapid sequence of symbols that wrapped around Mariah's wrist like a bracelet of light, tightening with a faint click as if locking in place. Suddenly, a jolt of warmth surged up her arm and into her chest, and the desert around her seemed to slow, wind thickening, sand falling in delayed arcs, sound stretching thin like elastic. She could see the drones closing in, but now they moved as if underwater. Sluggish and far too slow to catch her, the sphere pulsed once more, syncing perfectly with her heartbeat, and whispered inside her mind, not as a voice she heard, but a thought that wasn't hers. "You're linked now. Move." Mariah sprinted across the dunes with a speed she didn't know her body was capable of, her feet barely sinking into the sand as the sphere glided at her shoulder like a glowing guardian angel. Behind her, the drones finally adjusted, their beams sharpening. Converging, locking onto the streak of distorted air she left behind as she ran. The silver-visored figure barked another command, and the drones shifted formation instantly, folding into a razor-sharp V-shape and slicing through the sky. Toward her, just as the first drone closed the distance, its beam grazing her shoulder with a sting of cold light, the sphere's blue veins burst open and formed a shimmering translucent shield around Mariah, bending the beam away like glass bending sunlight. She stumbled behind a tall dune, gasping, heart racing, only for the sphere to project a single, pulsing symbol in front of her, a door-shaped outline hovering in the air. The sand beneath the symbol softened like liquid, spinning downward, into a perfect spiral, and in her head, the sphere's thought voice whispered again, more urgent this time. Without giving herself time to question the impossibility of what she was seeing, Mariah jumped into the swirling sand spiral, expecting to hit solid ground underneath. But instead, she fell through open air. For 3 terrifying seconds, she dropped weightlessly until a soft blue cushion of energy caught her and set her on her feet inside a vast underground chamber that shouldn't have existed beneath the desert. The walls were metallic but curved like the inside of a living organism, pulsing faintly with veins of white gold light that responded to her presence. The sphere floated down after her, dimming its glow as if to blend into the chamber's soft luminescence. Mariah turned in a slow circle, speechless. Dozens of cylindrical pods lined the walls, each fogged over, each containing a sleeping figure suspended in a pale blue fluid, except one pod stayed completely clear, empty, its glass cracked from the inside. Above the cracked pod, glowing letters formed a name Mariah hadn't seen in 2 years. Elias Keene. Her brother. Her breath faltered. And at that exact moment, the chamber lights flickered violently, and the sphere whispered sharply in her mind. "They found the entrance. Brace yourself." On a Sunday morning, Maria decided to volunteer at the local shelter, hoping that being around others might help fill the silence in her life. She spent hours sorting clothes, serving soup, and listening to stories of people who had lost far more than she could imagine. And as she walked home, she realized her prayer had shifted from "why me" to "use me," because grief had softened her heart in a way that made her see pain not only in her own life, but in the lives of others who had been silently carrying their own burdens. A few days later, Maria discovered one of Grace's old storybooks tucked behind a shelf, its pages worn from little hands that once turned them eagerly, and although opening it felt like reopening a deep wound, She sat by the fireplace and read it aloud, knowing her daughter's voice would once have echoed her own. And while the ache inside her grew sharper, her prayer grew deeper. Lord, let my love for her outshine my pain, a prayer that felt like planting a seed in the ashes of her heart, trusting that someday something beautiful might grow from it. As spring crept gently into the world, Maria stepped outside for the first long walk she had taken in months, feeling the soft earth beneath her feet and noticing the tiny buds forming on branches that had looked dead all winter. She paused beside a blooming wildflower and whispered, "If even the coldest season can end, maybe mine will too." And that quiet prayer settled somewhere deep in her heart, reminding her that grieving didn't mean life stopped, it simply meant life moved differently. Tenderly, waiting for her to catch up when she was ready, Maria began to visit the small park where she used to take Grace, sitting on the bench near the swings where her daughter once laughed with pure joy. And although the sight of other children running and shouting tugged painfully at her memories, she found herself praying for them, praying that their mothers would cherish every moment, praying that no child's laughter would ever be silenced too soon. And in offering those prayers, she felt a strange healing, as if giving love outward kept her own heart from collapsing inward. One afternoon, while sorting old boxes, she discovered a tiny handprint painting Grace made in preschool, each colorful fingerprint frozen in time, and for a moment Maria felt her breath catch as if she were holding something sacred. She pressed the painting to her heart and murmured, "Thank you for the years I had with her," realizing that while grief reminded her of what she lost, gratitude reminded her of what she was blessed to experience, and that small shift in prayer softened the bitterness that had been clinging to her spirit. When a friend from church invited her to a small prayer group for mothers, Maria hesitated, afraid her tears might drown her voice, but something in her nudged gently, "Go," and so she went, sitting quietly among women who shared stories of their own storms. Listening to them pray didn't fix her sorrow, but it helped her feel less isolated, and as she whispered her own trembling words, "Lord, help me belong again," she felt the first threads of community slowly stitching her fractured heart back together. Over time, Maria started journaling more honestly than before, writing not just prayers, but confessions of anger, confusion, loneliness, and moments where she felt abandoned by God. Yet with every raw sentence spilled onto the page, she sensed a deeper conversation unfolding, one where God wasn't offended by her pain but invited into it. And she realized that true prayer wasn't polished, it was vulnerable, it was real, it was a grieving mother daring to believe that her broken voice still mattered to heaven. One sunset evening, she sat outside on her porch wrapped in a shawl, watching the sky explode into purples, pinks, and golds, and as she rested her head against the wooden post, she felt a rare moment of peace wash over her. The beauty didn't erase her pain, but it reminded her that sorrow and wonder could coexist, and she whispered, "Lord, let beauty reach me even on the hard days," realizing that healing wasn't the absence of grief, it was the presence of grace woven gently into ordinary moments. During a visit to the local library, Maria picked up a book about mothers navigating loss, and as she read their stories, she felt her own reflected back, different faces, different tragedies, but the same hollow ache, the same unanswered questions. She clutched the book to her chest, whispering a prayer not just for herself, but for every mother in the world who carried invisible wounds. And in that moment she understood that her grief connected her to an unspoken sisterhood of women whose brokenness made them quietly brave. Maria began noticing that her prayers were changing shape. Instead of pleading for the pain to vanish, she prayed for guidance on how to live with it, asking God to teach her how to carry the memory of her daughter with tenderness instead of torment. And one morning as she dressed for the day, she caught herself smiling softly at a memory instead of crying, realizing that maybe healing wasn't something she would wake up to all at once, it was something she would grow into, moment by unexpected moment. One rainy afternoon, she found a small, forgotten box of Grace's drawings, stick figures holding hands, hearts floating over their heads, suns with smiling faces, and as tears rolled down her cheeks, they felt different than before. lighter somehow. Not from agony, but from love. She whispered, "Thank you for letting me be her mother," and in that prayer, she felt her identity shift from broken parent to grateful guardian of a precious life that, though brief, changed her forever. Maria decided to plant a small garden in her backyard, choosing flowers her daughter once loved, and as she knelt on the earth pressing each delicate seed into the soil, she whispered a blessing over everyone: grow for her, bloom for her, remind me of her, turning her grief into something living. And as she watered the ground, she realized that this simple act was its own kind of prayer, a prayer rooted in hope, proof that even a grieving mother could nurture beauty again. As days warmed, Maria would spend long hours tending to her new garden, letting the rhythm of digging, watering, and trimming steady her heartbeat. And one quiet morning, as she saw the first tiny sprout pushing through the soil, she whispered, "Even the smallest life fights to rise," realizing that her own healing was like that fragile stem, slow, uncertain, but determined. And as sunlight touched her face, she felt a prayer rise inside her, not from pain, but from possibility. When she visited the church again, the pastor spoke about how grief doesn't disappear but shifts shape over time, and as she listened, Maria felt as though someone was gently putting words to the ache she had carried for so long. After the service, she sat quietly in the pew, whispering, "Lord, help my grief become gentler with each season," and in that stillness, she sensed that her sorrow no longer screamed, it simply hummed, a reminder of love that had left footprints on her soul. One evening, she received a message from a mother she met at the shelter, asking how she found strength to keep going, and Maria paused for a long moment, realizing she didn't have an easy answer. Still, she typed slowly, "I pray, I cry, I breathe. And then I try again," and as she sent the message, she realized she was beginning to offer others the same comfort she once begged for, a quiet sign that her broken heart had begun growing edges strong enough to hold someone else's pain. Maria began walking through the town during the early mornings when the streets were quiet, and with each familiar corner she passed, she remembered moments she once shared with Grace, her small footsteps, her curious eyes, her laughter carried by the wind. And instead of collapsing under the weight of those memories, she began offering each one as a prayer of gratitude, a prayer of remembrance, a prayer of love strong enough to outlive loss. A neighbor invited her over for tea, and though Maria felt nervous stepping into a lively home filled with noise and life, she accepted, sitting at the table as children ran around the rooms, their playful chaos stung. Yet she found comfort watching the way a mother's hands instinctively protected, guided, and soothed, and she whispered inside her heart, "Lord, thank you for all mothers, heal the hurting ones," realizing her compassion had stretched far wider than before. On a windy afternoon, Maria visited the small hill overlooking the town, a place she once brought her daughter to watch the sunset, and as she stood at the top, the sky shifting colors like a quiet painting. She closed her eyes and felt the breeze brush her cheeks like tiny kisses. She whispered, "Grace, I feel you in moments like this," and though she knew the wind wasn't her child, the comfort it brought felt holy. Like God was letting her heart remember gently instead of painfully. Maria started collecting small stones on her walks, each one representing a moment of courage. The day she left the house after weeks of hiding, the day she smiled without guilt, the day she helped someone else grieve. She kept the stones in a clear jar by her bedside. And every night she whispered over them, "Lord, build strength in me one moment at a time," watching the jar slowly fill as a symbol that she too was being rebuilt, piece by tiny piece. When she attended a community gathering honoring families who had lost loved ones, Maria felt overwhelmed by the flicker of hundreds of candles glowing in the dusk. Each flame represented a story, a heartbreak, a prayer whispered through tears. And as she lit one for Grace, her voice trembled but didn't break, murmuring, "Thank you for her light," and in that sacred glow she realized that grief could be shared, held, and honored without drowning her. More and more, Maria found herself sitting with her journal open on her lap, writing prayers that were no longer just desperate cries for survival, but gentle reflections of how far she had come. I'm learning to breathe again. I'm learning to trust again. I'm learning to feel joy without guilt. And with each entry, she felt God meeting her in the quiet margins of her pages, guiding her toward a life reshaped but not ruined by loss. One summer night, as she lay on a blanket under a sky filled with stars, Maria watched the constellations shimmer like distant promises, and she whispered a long, steady prayer. Lord, help me live a life that honors her. Realizing that her daughter's story didn't end with her passing, it lived every time Maria chose compassion over bitterness, hope over despair, and love over fear, and in that starlit silence, she felt her grieving heart slowly becoming a grateful one. As autumn arrived, Maria found herself drawn to the small river at the edge of town, where fallen leaves floated gently along the surface like tiny boats carrying unseen prayers, and as she stood watching their slow journey downstream, she whispered, Lord, guide my heart the same way, realizing that grief, like the river, didn't demand speed or direction. It simply invited her to keep moving, even if the movement was quiet and barely noticeable. One afternoon at the shelter, a little girl with tangled hair and frightened eyes clung to Maria's dress without saying a word, and instinctively Maria lifted her into her arms, feeling the child's heartbeat flutter against her chest like a scared bird. Holding her felt tender yet painful, but instead of pulling away, Maria whispered a soft prayer over the girl's trembling shoulders. Let love find her, the way you are helping it find me. And in that moment, she realized healing often begins by comforting someone else's wound. Maria began attending a small weekly prayer circle, and though she rarely spoke, she sat among women who had weathered storms of their own loss, illness, abandonment, and as she listened to their trembling yet hopeful voices, she learned that grief didn't isolate her. It connected her to a quiet sisterhood of broken hearts, still learning how to beat. And each week she whispered a silent prayer of thanks for the strength she borrowed from others simply by sitting in their presence. One foggy morning, while cleaning her kitchen, Maria found a tiny drawing her daughter had made years ago, two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, and instead of collapsing as she once would have, she held the paper gently against her heart and whispered, "Thank you for every second I had with her," feeling a soft warmth rise in her chest, as though gratitude had finally learned how to share the same space her sorrow once claimed entirely for itself. When a young father came to the shelter, carrying his son's empty shoes after losing him in a tragic accident, Maria sat beside him on the cold bench, offering no advice, no explanations, only presence. She simply placed a hand over his and prayed silently, "Lord, hold him the way you held me," and in his shattered eyes, she recognized her own early grief. Realizing that her journey was slowly shaping her into someone who could stand beside others in the darkest moments without fear. Returning from the market one evening, Maria saw two children struggling to lift a kite caught in the branches of a tree, and though she hesitated at first, memories flickering painfully, she approached them with a soft smile, climbed onto a low wall, untangled the kite, and handed it back. The children's delighted laughter warmed something deep inside her, and she whispered, "Lord, thank you for the courage to step back into the world of children," knowing this small act marked another step in reclaiming joy without guilt. That night, Maria lit a candle by her daughter's photo and prayed a longer prayer than she had prayed in months. "I miss you, but I'm learning to live again. I hurt, but I'm learning to hope again. I'm broken, but I'm being rebuilt." And as the flame flickered gently, she felt a delicate peace settle over her like a soft shawl, reminding her that grief was no longer the storm raging through her chest, but the quiet rain nurturing the person she was becoming. During winter, the shelter organized a small festival for the children, and though the air was cold, their laughter filled the courtyard like warm lantern light. Maria baked cookies, tied ribbons in little girls' hair, and helped boys build tiny snow figures. And at one point a child tugged her sleeve and said, "You smile like someone's angel," and though the words made her eyes sting, she whispered inwardly, "Lord, let my pain become a blessing in someone else's life," realizing she was already living that prayer. One Sunday morning, Maria woke before dawn and sat by her window watching the sky slowly bloom from darkness into gentle pastel light, and as she observed this quiet transformation, she felt her heart reflect the same shift, subtle yet profound. And she whispered, "Lord, thank you for mornings